This is the shortest lecture of the whole course. I will finish the whole lecture within one video clip. Instead of dividing into different video clips, I will just finish within one video clips. Then this lecture is about nuclear weapons. Many of you may know the history of nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons was developed during the Second World War, and then the first successful test of nuclear bomb explosion is in New Mexico desert in 1945, and till now there has just been 2 times in which nuclear weapons really was used in the battlefield. There's only 2 times of the use of nuclear weapons in war. That is the bombardment of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the near the end of Second World War, very end of the Second World War. In the past, there's no international definition of weapons of mass destruction, and there's of course some restriction of use of some weapons, but not that well developed. Those restrictions, those that well written, not very formal restriction on the so-called not nuclear, but chemical weapons as well as biological weapons, 生化同埋化學武器。Then in 1948, these 3 weapons, nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, and biological weapons, they have been recognized as weapons of mass destruction by the UN since 1948, and the use of them then placed under very severe, strict restriction. Then, what is weapon of mass destruction? Firstly, they have the potential to inflict massive damage and devastating implication for civilians. Conventional weapons, like gun can just shoot 1 person at one time. And then other weapons like even missiles. Missiles is also conventional weapons. They can just kill and hurt a few thousand people at once. For those missiles with conventional warheads, not nuclear warhead. But for weapon of mass destruction, they can inflict damage, massive damage, at once. Say the use of biological and chemical weapons can, say, kill maybe near 10,000 people at once, and then the use of nuclear weapons can kill more than, say, 100,000 people, or even more than 1 million people at once. So they can inflict massive damage and devastating implications for civilians, the use of nuclear weapons. And they are non-legitimate and inhumane forms of warfare because this is a result of their massive damage and devastating implication for civilians. And they have a so-called powerful deterrent effect, making possessing this kind of weapons of mass destruction, the attack of them, unthinkable. Until now, there has not been a war between 2 states with nuclear weapons. Why? The main reason is because both sides are afraid that if they use nuclear weapons, then they will face the retaliation by the other side by nuclear weapons. And so that's a very good example of why nuclear weapons is a very powerful have a very powerful deterrent effect. 威懾嘅能力。Today's 5 is wrong. 8, in fact. I will change it. I put the PowerPoint on the OLE. 8 countries on the world publicly announced that they possess nuclear weapons. So not seven. I mean seven. UK, Russia, France, China, USA, Pakistan, India. Israel. Israeli government has hitherto not publicly announced that it possesses nuclear weapons, but we rarely believe that. It is very likely that Israel possesses nuclear warheads, around 75 to 200 nuclear warheads. North Korea, of course, North Korea, we know that it successfully tested the explosion of nuclear weapons, and then that means North Korea now possesses a few nuclear warheads. But whether it's operational is doubtful. Why? Because we know that the technological requirement for using nuclear weapons is very high, and we know that North Korea is such a poor country. Whether it possesses the necessary technology to practically deploy nuclear warheads for war is doubtful. Say whether North Korea has the technology to put nuclear warheads onto a missile and shoot the missile, doubtful. And so even North Korea, you know that possesses nuclear warheads, but whether it's operational is doubtful. So there's a puzzle on nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons has rarely been deployed to use in war. Let us just mention its actual usage. As I mentioned earlier, in human history, there has just been 2 times in which nuclear warhead or nuclear weapons has actually been used. Then, so nuclear weapons is an ultimate weapon, but it's not usually used by states even possessing nuclear weapons because of its massive damage, and also even damage your own environment, damage the environment of the world. So then why states still try to acquire nuclear weapons even in view of its low value in actual usage? There are different explanations from different school of thoughts of international relations. Realism. Realism, of course, as I mentioned in the second action, realism considers survival is the most obvious considerations for states to acquire nuclear weapons. Why? Because nuclear weapons, when they possess nuclear weapons, they can prevent from being totally destroyed by others. Say, this is so, states want to possess nuclear weapons in order to acquire so-called the second strike capacity. What is second strike capacity? When a state is attacked by nuclear weapons from others, then they can retaliate usually from shooting nuclear weapons in a submarine outside its own boundary to retaliate. This is so-called second strike capacity, retaliation capacity, I better say. That is, the state has the capacity to retaliate when others use nuclear weapons against it. This and secondly, that in fact the use of nuclear weapons involve also the issue of a security dilemma. why states are related to develop better nuclear weapons is because of this one. We call it anti-ballistic missile system. That is, when a state shoots a missile, nuclear missile, then anti-ballistic system can firstly use a satellite to spot the location of the missiles, and then the defending side will shoot a so-called counter missiles. The most well-known example of counter missile is the patriotic, the patriotic system, 愛國者導彈防禦系統. So a country's improve is this kind of anti-missile systems reduce the other side's capacity to retaliate, second strike capacity. So the other side must develop better missiles, better nuclear missile system. This is so-called security. This is an exact case of security dilemma. A very obvious case of security dilemma. And also, the best example to prove the argument of realism is that there have rather been no conflict between two states with nuclear weapons. The best example is India and Pakistan. India and Pakistan has been hostile to each other since the date of independence because they both came that they have the sovereignty of the whole Kashmir region. Kashmir, that is half submarine. But Kashmir is now divided into two parts. Some section of Kashmir is now occupied by Pakistan, and some section is occupied by India. These two sections. Now, Pakistan, so because both of them consider that they have the sovereignty of the whole Kashmir, so there are lots of war between them, at least 6 times. I mean, major conflicts, that is conflicts which death tolls is more than 100 persons. In 1999, India and Pakistan subsequently acquired nuclear weapons. Afterwards, there has not been any major conflicts or major war between these two sides, but of course some very minor, that is very minor conflict. That is conflicts which death toll is less than 10 persons, or at most a couple, maybe at most 30 or 40 persons. Of course, this kind of minor conflicts still very occasionally, infrequently happen between Pakistan and India. But after both countries, these two countries possess nuclear weapons, then there has not been any major conflict between them anymore. So you say, really, nuclear weapons is a very good device of weapons for deterrence, so as to protect its own a state's national security. I mean, constructivism. Constructivism is more its argument is more related to identity, and it's more related to identity of a state. States acquire nuclear weapons mainly in order to attain so-called great power status. Some states, even though they are very poor, and nuclear weapons for them is not that very useful practically, but they still decide strike for acquiring nuclear weapons. The main reason is because they want to attain a so-called great power status. Like China. China acquired nuclear weapons in year 1968. China at that moment was very poor. But as this is a very, very famous phrase mentioned by Mao Zedong, we want nuclear weapons, even at the expense of getting enough dressings or enough trousers, more accurate, enough trousers. In Chinese, it's called 寧要核子不要父子. Why? The main reason, of course, the obvious reason is to prevent China from being invaded by Russia, that is at that time Soviet Union, as well as the United States. But this is, you can say, just an excuse. United States and Russia very obviously did not have the desire to invade China, to of course conquer China, invade China and conquer China. No, the main reason is to attain a great power status for Mao Zedong to develop nuclear weapons in China. North Korea is the same. North Korea nuclear weapon is not that useful in its national defense because South Korea and the U.S. dare not to invade North Korea because North Korea is protected by China. But why North Korea acquires nuclear weapons? Even though after its acquisition of nuclear weapons, it faced international sanction. Why? It's because great power status. On the other hand, here, some countries, some very poor countries, they still want to acquire nuclear weapons because they want to achieve so-called great power status as identity. And on the other hand, some countries, they're very rich, their technology is very advanced. Why they does not want to acquire nuclear weapons? Including those countries, including Germany and Japan. They want to avoid bearing the nuclear tattoo. That is, for Germany and Japan, because they're losers in the Second World War, they don't want to be perceived as an aggressive state anymore. So even though the technology, of course, with their technologies and with their financial resources, they should be able to develop nuclear weapons, but they don't do so because they don't want to bear these nuclear weapons, and then they won't want to be perceived by other states as very aggressive. The Cold War is you can say, watershed for the nuclear proliferation. There has been a spread of nuclear weapons after the Cold War. Of course, this is a tautology, failure of nuclear non-proliferation program. But why this program is failed? First is because it is easier for countries to use nuclear weapons. In the past, nuclear weapons is hard to use because it must be carried by, the size is too big, it's too heavy, so it must be carried by missiles and also by so-called by jet. But now there's a new generation called low-yield battlefield nuclear weapons, or called mini nukes. One of the best examples of mini nukes is dirty bomb. As I introduced to you, I think 1 to 2 weeks ago. So, with this new generation of low-yield nuclear weapons can easily deploy to the front line, and then it can really use nuclear weapons. So easy because nuclear weapons is now easier to carry than in the past. So states now, because nuclear weapons usually can be used, so they have a higher intention to develop nuclear weapons. And then the third reason is because this is the consequence of end of the Cold War. End of Cold War, firstly, in the Cold War period, most states were placed under the so-called nuclear umbrella provided by USA and USSR. What is nuclear umbrella? Nuclear umbrella is, that means a protection. Not protection, but when a state is placed under nuclear umbrella, then if this state is attacked by nuclear weapons, then the providers of the nuclear umbrella will retaliate on behalf of that state. For instance, like Japan. Of course, Japan does not have nuclear weapons, but Japan is now placed under the nuclear umbrella of the US. So when Japan is attacked by nuclear weapons, then the US will retaliate on behalf of Japan. So this is nuclear umbrella. You attack Japan, or you attack any state under the nuclear umbrella of USA, and then of course in the post-war period, under USSR, they face the retaliation from the providers. Okay, but now because of the end of Cold War, so there's a withdrawal of US and Russia nuclear umbrella, and then this encourages states to stand on their own feet to acquire nuclear weapons. The best example is India. India has a lot of boundary conflicts with China, but in the post-war period, New India does not try to develop its own nuclear weapons. Why? The main reason is because India is placed under the nuclear umbrella of USSR. So if China attacks India by nuclear weapons, then then USSR will retaliate on behalf of India. But now, because but after the Cold War, USSR disappeared this country, or as more accurately speaking, disintegrates. So that's why India has to stand on their own feet by developing their own nuclear weapons. And also the end of Cold War leads to the diffusion of technology. This diffusion of technology from some independent countries, separate from the Soviet Union. Some member states, former member states of Soviet Union, is not independent, but they're very poor, like Armenia, Azerbaijan, something like this. Very poor countries. But these countries, even though they're very poor, because they are former member states of Soviet Union, so they, in their countries, there are some technicians know how to develop nuclear weapons, and also there are some facilities inside their countries to develop nuclear weapons. But they're very poor in order to earn money, so they sell those techniques and also those facilities to other countries to earn money. That's why the disintegration or collapse of Soviet Union provides loophole for the spread of nuclear weapons and know-how. Then I will talk about nuclear non-proliferation. What is nuclear non-proliferation? Nuclear non-proliferation is the international effort to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. This nuclear non-proliferation exists in two directions. The first one is to prevent the horizontal proliferation. That is to limit the spread of nuclear weapons to new countries. And then the other is vertical proliferation. That is the limit of the size of nuclear arsenals and also the lethality. The first effort is the so-called Treaty of Nuclear Non-Proliferation, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. In 1968, according to this treaty, except 5 countries, US, France, Britain, USSR, and China, that is the 5 permanent members of the US Security Council. Other states, they cannot acquire, they cannot possess nuclear weapons. But all countries on the world, nearly all countries on the world, except a few, signed this treaty. Those highlighted in red colors, they initially signed the treaty, but they later withdraw, including Israel, including Pakistan, including India. Highlighted in yellow, that is North Korea. It has not signed the treaty. In 1970s, the 5 nuclear weapon states issued negative security assurance to other states. That means they will not use nuclear weapons against non-nuclear weapon states. So even nuclear powers are at war with a state with nuclear weapons. Then the state with nuclear weapons promise they will not use nuclear weapons in the war. Like USA waged war against Iraq. That is the Gulf War twice. But US does not use nuclear weapons. And secondly, the South American countries, they signed a treaty called for the local treaties. Local is a region in the Mexican city. That is the capital of Mexico. They signed that treaty, and then all Latin American countries signed that treaty, and then in the treaty they promised that the Latin American, this continent, is created to be the first nuclear weapons free zone. No nuclear, all countries in the Latin American this continent promised not to develop nuclear weapons. And then in 1963, US, Britain, and Soviet Union signed the so-called Partial Test Ban Treaty, that is to limit the underground nuclear tests. But they can still test nuclear weapons in the atmosphere and outer space. Then in the 1996, this partial ban progressed to another treaty called Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. In fact, this treaty banned the use of the test of nuclear weapons. Entirely banned. And then afterwards, let's accept nuclear tests inside computing. Other forms of nuclear tests is banned. Okay, here. However, this treaty has not been taken into effect. Why? Because according to the requirement of this treaty can just be enforceable after all states possess nuclear weapons by the non-proliferation Treaty of Nuclear Non-Proliferation. All those countries sign this nuclear test ban treaty, comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty. Then this treaty can be enforceable. But however, today, USA and China, both these two countries which are legitimate to possess nuclear weapons under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Both these two states now has not yet signed this comprehensive nuclear test ban. So this treaty cannot be enforceable. Then the two countries which have the largest number of nuclear warheads, nuclear weapons, USA and Russia, they negotiate with each other and then sign a range of nuclear proliferation reduction treaties, including strategic arms limitation treaties in 1972 and 1978, and then strategic arms reduction treaty again in 1991 and 1993. After signing two treaties, you can see the nuclear warheads of these two countries dropped sharply afterwards. Now it just possesses around 1/7 of the number of warheads for Russia, nearly 1/8 for U.S. Around 1/6 of nuclear warheads that is possessed during the Cold War period. During the peak of Cold War period. And then evaluation on the effects of nuclear non-proliferation. The vertical non-proliferation is significant. The result of nuclear non-proliferation is significant, even though the comprehensive that is this one. The comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty has not been effective till now, but there has no sign that the arsenals of nuclear weapons among states increase, and there's some sign that the arsenal of those states reduce in the foreseeable future. I think here I will change it because there's some reduction in the size of nuclear weapons. We have observed that in the last figures. So we can say this is effective because the size of arsenals of nuclear weapons of those states which acquire nuclear weapons have some reductions in the size. And the most significant result is that none of the 5 powers has ever conducted any nuclear test since 1996. Of course, there's an unconfirmed news that China tested nuclear weapons a few days ago, but this is unconfirmed case, unconfirmed news. So the confirmed news is that except this unconfirmed case, there has not been any nuclear test since 1996. There are some tests inside the computer, but they are not physical tests of nuclear weapons. But there's a limitation on horizontal proliferation because the result is mixed. Because, of course, you can see that in the year 1968, there has just been 5 countries possessing nuclear weapons, but now it's expanded to 9. But the increase appears to be stable and limited, so in some degree, this is successful. But why is it difficult to forge nuclear non-proliferation? The first one is security dilemma, as I mentioned earlier. Every state, when their enemy possesses nuclear weapons, they also want to possess nuclear weapons in order to prevent the other states from launching a nuclear weapon. I mean, their enemy to launch nuclear attack against them. And secondly, some states consider it is legitimate, it is legal for them to acquire nuclear weapons. The greatest difficulty is that it is very difficult to control the most heavily armed and the most powerful state on the world to acquire nuclear weapons, because all countries which have the ability to develop nuclear weapons are the strongest country on the world. No small states except North Korea have the ability to develop nuclear weapons. So it's hard to control those large states. How to make them reduce the size of nuclear weapons, and then of course prevent some states which are large, which are strong to develop nuclear weapons. Hard to do so. Okay, thank you.